Hi, and welcome to the When Women Fly podcast. Each episode, I have poignant conversations with women who fly, run, surf, ski, climb, or otherwise soar, and possess a passion for life that is infectious. These are honest and insightful conversations about dreams and reinvention, often in the face of uncertainty, doubt, or other impediments. We talk about busting paradigms, grit, working hard, and playing hard, all while building a community around the empowering metaphor of flight. I am your host, Sylvia Winter, a pilot, runner, mother, skier, list maker, and apparently podcaster. I believe that when we share our stories, own our fears, and dismantle our perceived limitations, the possibilities are boundless. Whether you're pursuing your passion or simply love the idea of possibility and wonder, this podcast is for you. Thank you so much for joining me today. Let's get started. This week, in honor of Women's History Month, I bring you the fourth in an array of conversations with women central to a story of community and the practice of community building. While this theme amplifies the way in which these women, have organized people and shifted the narrative for females in their field as architects of communities, at the same time, our conversations tell stories of individual, multifaceted lives. For as powerful and uplifting as strong communities are, there is something fascinating about the interdependent relationship between the individual and the collective. Today's guest is a skydiver, yogi, author, and speaker. Melissa is a wildly unique person, and yet the role of community has been enormous from her earliest days growing up enmeshed in a skydiving community. We often have the pretense of choosing community, but sometimes, frequently, I wonder if communities choose us for the unique peculiarities and attributes that make us distinctive and yet essential. Like the bird to its flock, the tree to its forest, the unique snowflake to the winter storm. It is as if we all have a role, and that at its essence, it is to be fully ourselves, because that is what the collective needs. So, what about you? What do you do every day to remind yourself of who you really are? And what role does community play for you? And what role do you play in it? Melissa Lowe has a heck of a story, and this is the setup you need to know. First, if this was a skydiving podcast, Melissa would need no introduction. She is a third-generation skydiver. Her grandfather was in the 82nd Airborne as a paratrooper in World War II. Melissa's father, Roger Nelson, was a pioneering skydiver and a controversial character who spent nearly 5 years in prison for his drug smuggling escapades during Melissa's teens. Melissa's resume includes over 11,000 skydives, 23 world records, medals in freestyle and free fly, instructor's license, a private pilot license, member of the Highlight all-female pro skydiving team, and she's a certified yoga instructor. She's an entrepreneur at her core, and her medium is skydiving and other modalities of flying, literally. Her leadership is also a tribute to the community she grew up in and has always returned to. She has taken on a number of roles in the skydiving community, from participant, organizer, and pilot to a drop zone owner, the wife of a drop zone owner, the mom of a small boy growing up in a drop zone community, and recently, she was elected the National Director of the U.S. Parachute Association, USPA. Melissa has a ton of passion and self-awareness, making this conversation both inspiring and also grounding. Without further delay, enjoy this hour with Melissa Lowe. Hey, Melissa, I am so thrilled to talk to you today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Would you mind just maybe starting from your origin and how you grew up? Being a third generation skydiver is very relevant. So if you could sort of just frame that in your own words, that would be a really great place to start.
Yeah, awesome. So I am a third generation skydiver. I always like to pay tribute to my family and my family history because I wouldn't be where I'm at today without them for sure. So my grandfather was in the 82nd Airborne and he was a paratrooper in World War II. And when he came out, he was really intrigued with sport parachute jumping because it was just becoming a thing back then, but obviously with not a lot of social media and media covering skydiving stuff, it was still kind of a outcast sport, if you will. And my uncle and my dad were out on a canoe trip with my grandfather, and they heard the hum of an airplane overhead and slowed its engines, a very familiar sound to my grandfather. And he looked up in the sky and he saw jumpers. And there was a rush of adrenaline overwhelming his body and an excitement. And he asked my dad and my uncle if they wanted to go check out the parachutes. And of course, they said yes. And of course, this is where we say the rest is history. My dad and my uncle fell in love with the sport. They became pioneers themselves in their own rights of their own era. And when I came along, my dad owned a skydiving center and he took me up for my first skydive when I was 5. And I did about 11 tandem jumps by the time I was 11. And then I did my first solo jump when I was 16. And then people started paying me when I was 19. I didn't realize that was a thing. I didn't realize skydiving could be a career outside of what my dad did. And I realized that I could make it a career and decided not to go to college and pursue skydiving. And here I am 27 years later.
Yeah, so you were exposed at such an early age, you really didn't know it was very normal to you, and it was sort of what your family did.
Yep.
Yeah. So your childhood, we'll get more into some of the complexity of it, but I feel as though, maybe we should just dive into it now. I don't know, what do you think? Should we just dive into it?
No, let's just go. We'll go there.
Your father, Melissa, Roger Nelson, was controversial. He was a leader, he was charismatic, he sort of dazzled the burgeoning skydiving world in at least the United States and certainly the Midwest. But your childhood was full of complexities as far as I can gather. You had sort of the public artifice, the happy family, and but your father did bump up against some troubles. And I mean, it's all public, so I don't know why I'm sort of hedging it, but right, I mean, you've written 2 books about it. So.
That's so funny. I felt like that for a really long time in my life. And it was after I published both books, I realized that our life was no longer a secret. And I would always tell people, they're like, Melissa, if I tell you something, will you always keep it a secret? I'm like, I'm a drug smuggler's daughter. I totally get it. I'm with you.
Let's just jump there to talk about your father and his influence on you and how you navigated that. I mean, as we're talking about your childhood and sort of 0 to 16, that was when things really got heated up and when he was in prison and then he came out of prison and started the Chicago skydiving. Talk to us about that and then how you ended up writing a book about that.
Yes. So my dad was definitely a drug smuggler and he was that charismatic person. And he did some pretty extraordinary runs, if you will, that were book worthy, that were trying to get a movie done. But as anybody in that field knows, time and money and knowing the right people, it's a thing for sure. But he was a force to be reckoned with. And growing up for me, I was a lot like him, but I also am blended with the softer, logical side of my mother as well. So I do have a temper like my dad did, and we didn't get along. We fought a lot and struggled. And it was my journey into skydiving wasn't, oh, you're a drop zone owner's kid. You have this golden brick road that you get to just go on. It wasn't like that at all because I really had to fight and prove that I wanted to be a skydiver. And when I was really young, I was really torn in so many different directions and who I was and what I wanted to do and break away from this family mold because my dad was in a negative spotlight in the public. But in the skydiving community, it was very mixed because people appreciated because he was a pioneer and he created technology, which is still today's industry standards. But he was also a bully and a jerk. And so people either loved him or hated him for sure. And, I was his daughter, so we definitely butted heads quite a lot. And it wasn't until later in my life did we ever really start to get along. And I didn't realize, and I say this in a really good way because I always respect my father, but he was also sexist. And we didn't really understand what sexism was at that time in that era. And I think it was just the generation and understanding. And now looking back at it, it makes so much more sense. But back then I thought, oh, am I not performing good, or do I need to do more? What do I need to achieve to earn my father's respect and love? And that was always been my journey in finding solutions. I think that's become a characteristic of mine, and never to look at, what's his problem? Where is it in me? What pieces do I have to connect here? So it wasn't until later in my life did that really happen for us. And let's see, I was 12 when he went to prison, and that was a really, really rough transition, especially the public perception. I really wasn't the cool kid growing up at school. I was the girl whose dad was a convicted felon. So that was really tough. And I was really lucky because we still had this skydiving community we were connected with. And that community always welcomes our family with open arms. That was a saving grace for sure. And then my dad got out of prison when I was 16 years old. And I don't know how you were when you were 16, but I was quite the rebel and didn't want to listen. My dad was gone for almost 5 years and didn't want, and we were so much alike. So we warred and fought. It was mass explosion. And yeah, I couldn't wait to get out of the house. So that was really rough for me. So trying to figure out, do I want to do skydiving because I have these opportunities, but then I would have to face my dad all the time. And I just wanted to break out of that mold. But it was a love hate relationship with skydiving because it was always interwoven with my dad's narrative. Because anywhere I went, everyone knew who my father was. So I had to contend with being Roger's daughter for quite some time. And I was so set on a time where people would know me by my name. And I didn't know what that looked like. And that felt incredibly heavy and a burden that I just kept going, yes, I want to be a skydiver. No, I want to go try to do college and do all this stuff. So I did. I ping ponged around a bit, but somehow skydiving was always the same throughout that entire time. So no matter if I tried other things, I would always come home and skydive and, go try other things and come home and skydive. And somehow I got good enough where when I turned 19, I went to a skydiving center, and unbeknownst to me, I was getting paid. And it was like this light bulb moment because they handed me a couple $100 and I was 19 and I was working for my parents at the skydiving center and trying to figure things out. I had this light bulb moment going, oh my gosh, I could make this a career for myself. And I did. I hustled. I became a member of the Sugar Gliders, which is an all women's free fly team, and we competed in the open division. And I believe still to this day, there has never been an all women's team in the open category of free flying. So we set the stage for empowering women in the sport. And it wasn't even my intention to do so. It just happened that I embraced women in the sport because it was a male dominated industry. And anytime a cool chick would come over, I'd be like, hey, 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 I'll teach you everything I know. Come hang out with me.
No, yeah, and I love that you've, just been able to frame what must have been a real complex growing up with both the stability and the instability, so almost simultaneously from different components of your family and the communities you were in. I can understand how in a time when I think inherently we're ping-ponging around trying to figure life out, that was probably magnified in your case. The waves were probably really high and really low. I'm sort of envisioning that.
Yeah, I really thank my mom because she was literally the rock of the family where she was the constant, right? No matter all the crazy stuff exploding and emotional wars that we would have in the house, like she was always there. She was always present. She was always taking care of us. And when the media would have a frenzy with my dad, she would make sure that we were never around. So we weren't exploited in the papers. So she kept our life private. She was an extraordinary woman to have to navigate those challenging times for sure.
Did you feel like your mom or your dad had a vision for you?
No, I don't think my dad had a vision for me, but I don't know if it was a vision for my mom, but my mom loved us. was definitely, the rock, stability, and love in our life.
I love that. It's important, I think, that to have that armature. You did step away from skydiving for some time.
When I say step away from skydiving, I never stopped. I could never get away from it. In fact, I've taken a lot of breaks in skydiving, but it's like a month or two or something or another thing because I grew up in Chicago, I moved to Hawaii and I did Hawaiian outrigger canoe paddling for a couple years, which our canoe team won 2 states 2 years in a row. So those things kinda took me away, but then anytime a world record skydive would come up, I would go and get current, brush up my skills, and show up, or I just could never, ever fully get out of it, where my first true break in skydiving was when I was pregnant with my son.
So when you were in Hawaii, that was probably a big geographic break from the home base, but you did do some skydiving there, or it was just when you came back you did skydiving? There, you found it.
Yep, and I would base myself in Chicago for people to hire me out from there. So, yeah, I would have some time here and there off. But I think the big break for me was not skydiving full time. Because when I was skydiving full time, I was living on a skydiving center, making 1,000 plus jumps a year. And then I went from that to doing 250 to 500 jumps a year and not being totally immersed. So, yeah, going to Hawaii was so crazy time in my life because it was also a time that I was getting sober as well and taking me away. I thought I was super cool and awesome, this hot little girl, skydiving and stuff. And then when I was getting sober and moved into a completely different state, such as Hawaii, and you learn this whole different culture, it was hard. And well, I didn't realize this at the time, but I was going through an adrenaline withdrawal, like a physical withdrawal, because I had done full time skydiving for so long and getting sober. So I'm detoxing. And then this cultural shock of moving, I was depressed.
Wow.
Getting out of bed was really hard. I think the love and the foundation that my mom was able to lay down for me was that thing that I needed, that light that somehow I would always take the next step, right? Like, so I went for this depression and I made a goal for myself. If I take a shower today, it would be really great. If I get to a 12-step meeting, that's going to be even bonus, just getting out of the house. And somehow, some way these steps started turning into a lot of time and then coming back into the sport. But I think it's really great because skydiving is amazing and we love hard, we play hard, and we party hard. Like a lot of subcultures, I'm sure. And it was really awkward for me because a lot of people knew me and now I'm not drinking. So this really weird, like, oh, do I say hi? Do I not say hi? I got a beer. Can I hang out with her? It's like totally strange. But somehow, like we all made it as a community and that awkwardness started falling away. And yeah, it was a really tough time, Hawaii. It was so good for me because I needed to be away from everyone who knew me and be in a completely different place. And it was the first time in my life that I really had to do this, start over period and rebuild myself from scratch, which I think is one of the most amazing gifts if you ever get to be in that in your life, to be in a place where you have to start over. Because a lot of people fear it. I did. I mean, Hawaii looked amazing and beautiful. And then I get there and I was like, oh, this is it. This is what people talk about. Getting out of that, I think, is some of the best lessons you could ever learn in your life.
Yeah, and I think it makes you evaluate the internal motivators and the internal factors that are playing into your identity and who you are that maybe have not even been nourished if the external motivators have been so loud and positive, which it seems like in your case they were. There was a lot of external stuff going on in your life, and it's really interesting to hear you articulate that pivot point and how important that was to you.
Yeah, it was so good. I mean, it was the first time in my life that I didn't have this label of Roger's daughter over my head. And
Mhm.
skydiving was an outcast sport for a very long time. And this period of time was a transition with social media, kind of giving us a little bit more of control of the dialogue that happens about skydiving. And so we went through this shift, but it still gave me that opportunity to not be just a skydiver. I got to be me and really discover, what do I like? Do I really want to do skydiving? And then, like I said, I could never get away from it because this time away really rebuilding myself and taken me away and out of my comfort zone. We all talk about that cliche, but it's so true. And that was an extreme for me. But I found my passion and purpose in skydiving like I never have before. Where before that, I would be burnt out and just tired of the repetitiveness. And skydiving can be really hard on your body. But this is also the time in Hawaii that I was really discovering yoga
Hmm.
that just really complemented putting the 2 together for sure.
It's so neat to think about how the mental game is so much of performance, right? If you think of the sort of the skydiving as a performance, to teach the mental game does take both a skill from the instructor, but also an openness from students. And they might not be there for that part of it as well as the teacher might not have that
Yeah,
capacity.
and sometimes, a lot of people think, "Oh, you must be soft and gentle and whatever in your way of skydiving." And there's sometimes I'm not. I just have to be really rough and abrasive because everybody learns differently. And I feel in tune, but as much as I say I want to feel like I'm in tune, sometimes I just step back and let things happen the way they unfold. But sometimes I'll chime in and just be, people aren't performing and they're scared of everything. And I'm like, listen, folks, skydiving's dangerous. You've made it through the student progression, and there's something within you that wants to stay here. But if you're having this inner battle of being scared, you are now more dangerous than you are helping any situation. So you got to get clear in your head on why you're here so we can be successful creating history together or get you to the next level where you're going. And some people are, it's like, yes, it resonates with them. And they're like, I want this even more. Let's do this. And there's some people that have a good, truthful conversation with themselves and think maybe skydiving's not for me. Maybe this discipline, or maybe what I'm doing right now, but there's something else in skydiving that I resonate with more. But yeah, sometimes you just have to get down and real. But yeah, I think a lot of that gift came from Jacqueline.
Yeah, gosh. So let's talk about skydiving a little bit more and dive a little bit deeper into what you just started to talk about, which are some of the effects you want experiences during skydiving, but then I would argue are also transferable that people bring to their lives and apply to the complexity of their lives or to, in the case that you just described about conviction, like I kind of do and I kind of don't, I'm afraid, but I won't be able to do this thing if I don't work through my fear. So, I mean, that's life, right?
Absolutely. Skydiving puts everything in full frontal focus because it makes you get real with certain things. And I think that offers a lot of freedom and confidence building. It can also be a dangerous thing because people can get cocky, and that's where people get hurt in the sport. So it's being able to, man, it's a fine line. It is a balance of finding that light and staying in that path. It's okay to weave, back and forth because I think that's life in general, but you have to get real in skydiving because it is a dangerous sport at the end of the day. But it makes you get real with a lot of things quicker. I see people work through a lot of fears that have nothing to do with skydiving. It's whatever they're dealing with life. But skydiving is that thing that gets it out. Sometimes I joke around, I should have become a psychologist because of working with so many. I feel like hairstylists might be the same way for sure because you hear about all the things that are happening in people's lives. But yeah, for sure.
So, what after someone skydives who's really gone through a lot of conflict between sort of the fear and courage that it takes, what type of transformations do you see?
I've watched people have problems with their weight and body image, and skydiving has given them I don't know if it's the confidence or the dialogue just changes internally because you've done something that very few people even want to do, that have taken charge of their bodies and have become fitness instructors, yoga instructors, and excel in those industries. I've seen people, I had one student, I actually had a couple students who had the, they just felt confident with me that I was the first person they told that they were gay. And I just hold that space so dear. I don't know why I'm tearing up right now, but it's just such precious moments that people can find themselves in skydiving because whether it's we're just getting these endorphin releases and it just shifts things just enough to be able to face things that seemed scary before skydiving. And I takes that fear away, going, well, if I can jump out of a plane, I should be able to do this thing. I've had people not have a direction in life and found skydiving. And I've told them, I said, you don't have to be a skydiver. But if you stay around long enough, you will earn the credentials to become an instructor. Maybe you want to compete. Maybe you want to do a world record. Maybe you want to travel to exotic boogies and go land on the beach in this amazing space in a foreign country or something like that. And I've seen them take that, not go, oh, well, I don't have to be Melissa in the sport. I can just go be me and find these things that I love in the sport. And they become the next leaders in the sport. I've got to witness a lot of people's transformations. And as much as I want to take credit, I know it's not just me, that I got to be just a moment, a blip in their timeline and creating, because I feel like this stuff is already in people, but skydiving is an opportunity for people to catapult into wherever they want to go, because a lot of times people still hold on to the past. Well, my family says this, my family wants this of me, I need to do this. So they kind of put that aside and put things in perspective and go live some amazing lives. And I have some friends who tried skydiving. They're like, yep, not for me. And, we're still good friends. Like, skydiving doesn't define my relationships with people.
And can you speak to the community of skydiving?
Yes. Like I said before, we love hard, we play hard, we party hard. And we lose hard too. And I think that's what really binds us together, because when we lose in skydiving, it doesn't affect the close people. It is a ripple that affects the entire skydiving community. And it hurts. It is this soul shifting experience that it's unexplainable. But that thing, that unexplainable thing, really brings us together, because when we see each other and you hug each other, we hug a little bit tighter, we hug a little bit longer, because whether it's in skydiving or not, because I've had a lot of friends lose their lives with cancer, car accidents, just health problems in general. So skydiving just is that glue that bonds us together. I think a lot of the only similar thing that I heard about our bond is those that are in the military, because you experience these highs and lows and everywhere, and you have a mission that you have to complete, that no one understands that than the people that are there with you. And skydivers are kind of the same way. Like, when we have our lows, it's when there's a loss of life in the sport, and our highs and when we are doing and chasing history and making world records happen, because it is an incredible journey just to get there and then to complete it and then keep on going.
And how do you process the loss?
I've been in the sport for a very long time and been a part of a lot of evolution. And from that, we've developed a lot of technology and training techniques to help mitigate those risks of the people. So we always try to find a positive way. Well, how do we not have that happen again? So I appreciate that of the community. It's almost this instant thing that everyone wants to figure out what happened and how can we make it better. But I lost my dad skydiving. And that was the closest loss that I have ever experienced. And it was the most painful thing, because when you're in it for a while, you haven't lost anyone close, maybe you heard about it, you still feel it, you respect it, puts the reality check on the sport. But it's not until you have someone really close to home that it really puts things in perspective for you. Because when my dad died, it took me about 2 weeks to want to even go skydive again because I just was scared. I just felt scared. And I have moments of fear in the sport, even with all the time that I have in it. It's just because it's real. That stuff just makes it really real. And I've had other close friends pass away, and you would think with all this time that it would become easier. It doesn't ever come easier. And people always say, "Oh, yeah, time heals all wounds." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, that's cool. Maybe that works for you." There's always a part of you. I think there can be something to speak about, being able to let some of that go. But when it's in an industry that, you do for work or play or however it is for you, that I always feel like if you let it go, you might be too naive to ever look that you think that it's never going to happen to you. So I always do my gear checks. I never act as if, and I'm very mindful of not being current complacent because that's a thing too. And I try to do my best in being a good sportsman where, if I go on current, I'm not going to be doing these high level skydives. I'm going to warm up and get my stuff all brushed off and then get into that space because that space for me isn't a long transition, but I respect the transition instead of skipping over it because I've just seen so much in my life and I want to be a great, not a good role model. I want to be a great role model that people look and they say, hey, that, Melissa is doing it. Where do I check myself here? But yeah, the loss in skydiving is great. It is so great. And even if it's someone in skydiving that does not skydiving, it still is that ripple effect because the bonds that we have are just, they're so unexplainable. It's so hard to explain this, but
I know sometimes the most powerful things just have an elusive language to them, and I get that. I appreciate you you trying to give it some shape. And I'd love to hear how you stay grounded. You're clearly a very action-oriented person, and I get a sense that you process things sort of through your body and through doing things. At the same time, you have a yoga practice, and maybe that is the counterpoint, but I'd love to hear how you stay grounded.
I think the irony of the two professions I love the most is yoga and skydiving because they are the complete polar opposite for sure. But it could also be because of my birth sign. I had some people tell me because I am on the cusp of Virgo Leo that they are also very yin and yang. That I have my father who is very yang and my mother who's very yin. So I have these threads in my life that I could attribute that to, but I think my experiences helped compile that because having taken that semi break when I moved to Hawaii and going back and forth, all these things that people before me were saying started to make sense because I wasn't old enough or mature enough to hear them and process them. But they always would say things such as, you need to have balance, you need to have some sort of stability. That started to resonate with me the older I got. And having moved to Hawaii and picked up some other sports, I wanted to do something outside of skydiving because I also started hearing about cross training and how that can excel in the sport that you are in full time. So sometimes soccer players go do another sport so they can be better at playing soccer. And that break also helps you not be burnt out of your sport and then makes you stronger, faster, or whatever, more aware in your industry. So I would create these goals, and sometimes one of it was getting my pilot's license. So I got my pilot's license. I became a paraglider pilot. I was the Hawaiian outrigger canoe steerswoman for 2 years, where we won states, so that was competitive. I ran a 15K. And by the way, I'm not really a runner. And after that event, I was like, why would anyone do this professionally? I thought it was totally insane. It was only a 15K, but it was the most worst thing I've ever done. I try to challenge myself in ways to continue to be athletic, current, balanced. because every time I take myself away from the thing I love, when I go back to that thing that I love, I'm more passionate about it. I'm more tender to it. I'm not so burnt out in these rough edges, and I feel a little bit more patience when I'm working with people. I mean, maybe that just comes with age. I have no idea, but that is my experience.
No, I think it's something that's really magical about you, and maybe it is your birth sign, but holding opposites is sometimes comes very naturally, or at least sort of as a given in the way that you process and navigate through the world and challenges. And I get a sense that you're one of those people. It's interesting. Brene Brown, in her more recent work, has talked about how the people that really can kind of be successful, and I don't mean that in a kind of measured, like, corporate way, but just really have full lives, are able to hold, like, really extreme opposites together and navigate that, and I think that's just a really interesting topic, and it's neat to hear the way that you have experienced that and lived that. So let's, talk about what we haven't really gotten into, which is the different types of flying that you've enjoyed. And if you don't mind, I'd love it if I could just ask you, and then if you could give a short definition and what it means to you. So, for instance, we'll start with the non skydiving. So, becoming a private pilot, what did that mean to you in your smorgasbord of different types of flying? How does it, what place does it serve?
It's interesting. The first word that came to my head when you said private pilot was "woo!" And it was because I remember first solo flight, and this is all after my dad passed away. So all this stuff isn't because my dad wanted me to do it. Now this is me marking my own footsteps in my own history and my own legacy. So when I became a pilot, it was for me and no one else but me. That when I took off in the plane and had control of the plane, I no longer felt that fear of what if the plane crashes? Could I go up and help the pilot? I mean, there's weird random things, but when I did my first solo, I literally screamed, "Woo!" the whole time until I did my 3 landings and stopped, and then I got out of the plane and I was like, "Woo!"
And what did that type of flying, that perspective give you that was different than other flying that you'd done before that? Because you're operating a aircraft in that case versus
Really empowering. Now, mind you, my experience in skydiving, I watch people find this freedom and find this confidence, but it's something that was always a part of my life. So I didn't find my freedom and my confidence through skydiving. Yeah, maybe in ways for sure. There's got to be a little bit of that sprinkled in there. But when I started doing these other things outside of skydiving, that's where I found my freedom because I remember taking up a friend once I became a private pilot and I took up my first, you know, guest my first passenger, she went, "We could go anywhere?" I went, "Yeah." And she goes, "There's no roads." I'm like, "No." I'm like, "Where do you wanna go?" And she's like, "Let's go over there." So that was a freedom in a way that I think the best way to relate that is when you're 16, you get your driver's license, and you have that freedom to now you don't have your parents telling you where to go and what time to be there. You kinda have that freedom of taking care of your own schedule and start, that independent feeling. So that was very similar to learning how to fly for sure.
yeah, so the order of magnitude is much greater when the sky is literally your limit, but that's really interesting. So, yeah, let's talk about skydiving, and some of this is just jargon that the community knows, but I just wanna run through some of it because I think there's some interesting terms too. So, drop zone, not a type of flying, but just as a term,
So a drop zone is a skydiving center.
and you have a couple world records in a variety of different styles, and speak to those as they come up. So, what is freestyle?
So I don't have a world record in freestyle, but freestyle is a discipline where you do a gymnastics routine and you have a camera flyer video everything. This is very, very difficult. It's very hard, but it's very beautiful, awesome, and elegant. It's kind of my secret guilty pleasure in the sport because everyone wants to do flips and shit in skydiving. And it's just a beautiful way of doing flips and shit in the sky for sure.
And what about free fly?
Free flying's home. That is my discipline of choice. So free fly is a vertical orientation where you're flying head to earth or feet to earth, where it looks like you're sitting in a chair. So we call it upright flying and head down flying.
Okay, so I wanna understand this a little bit more. So when your head is down and the aerodynamics are different, what is that sensation? Like, why is it your favorite?
It could be because of a lot of different reasons. The discipline that in the era that I learned was called relative work or formation skydiving or belly flying. And it's literally you're flying belly to earth. It's the traditional skydiving. It's how everyone learns and is introduced into the sport. And at the time that I learned free flying, it wasn't perfected yet. Everyone was still kind of exploring it. So it was really cool. I mean, I didn't look at it like this. I was super young, as if I was pioneering the discipline. But yeah, we were pioneering the discipline. We were figuring it out. And I think that because there was no rule book and handbook and the word free flying, as we were all just young punk kids and we didn't want to be connecting together. We were just free and doing these crazy choreographed routines and stuff like that. So that really resonated with me then. But it's a really difficult discipline because you are going faster and the subtle movements that you make a bigger difference than when you're belly flying. And since then, a lot of other disciplines have evolved out of the sport, which is beautiful. Skydiving is young and we're still pioneering new things. And that's another thing that's very attractive about the sport. We can continue to learn.
And what about wingsuit flying?
Wingsuit, I think everybody refers to this as squirrel suits, where you look like you're a little sugar glider. That's in fact, the irony of our team name when we were just a bunch of girls free flying, not wingsuiting, but you have a wing attached from your hand down to about the top of your thigh, and then you have a webbed wing in between your legs. So I do have a world record in wingsuiting as well, where we create a formation on a grid. And as long as you're in the correct slots, you get your world record. And but yeah, wingsuiting is awesome. It's interesting because it's so aesthetically pleasing, and a lot of people see the wingsuit base jumping, which is the proxy flying, the wingsuit really close to mountain slopes and stuff like that. So that's a completely different sport. But because of that, a lot of people are discovering skydiving, which is awesome. And so people get into sport because they want a wingsuit. But then they discover all these other things that the sport has to offer, and wingsuit is just one just extra thing. They're like, "Oh, well, you can free fly, or you can do canopy piloting, or whatever. Just or you can be on a team."
Is the sensation of flying like a squirrel different, or how is it different, I should ask?
Yeah, it's definitely different. You have a more forward trajectory because you're falling slower. So a traditional skydive, we jump industry standards around 13,500 feet. So you have about a minute of free fall. If you're belly flying, you have about 45 seconds if you're free flying. But if you're wingsuiting, and depending on what kind of wingsuit, because just as there are many types of airplanes, there are many types of wingsuits, you could stay up for a minute or more.
So how do you train for wingsuit flying?
You first need to have 200 skydives under your belt, and you take a specific course because the course will address if the equipment you currently have is appropriate for wingsuiting, because you have to have specific type of a container deployment system, things like that. So as long as they meet the standards, but you work with a coach through that whole process. You learn how to navigate, you learn the emergency procedures, because part of the wingsuit fails, you have to learn how to do that. That's why you need to have 200 jumps before putting on a wingsuit, because you need to know how to fly your body when these things happen. So,
That's what maybe my underlying query is about flying your body, which is what you're doing in all of these cases, right? Which is that depending on
depending on the discipline, yeah, for sure. Every single one, no matter what orientation you fly, you are flying your body. For me, even though I have wingsuit record and I dabble in wingsuiting, I have this, secret like love for it, but I really don't want to dedicate my time to it, because when I started, it was just flat and level flying. But now people are doing what's called acro wingsuiting, where they're free flying in their wingsuits, which is awesome and so exciting and beautiful to watch. Now that gets me super excited about wingsuiting because it just opens up the possibilities. But for me, I prefer free flying because I don't like anything attached to me. Because when you fly the wingsuit, you also have to fly the suit as well as you fly your body. Man, those guys that can do that acro wingsuiting, my hats are off to them because it's beautiful and definitely difficult.
Wow. Let's pivot a little bit and talk about the involvement you've had in the Women's Skydiving Network and in projects that are specifically advocating for more women coming into the community and also sticking around.
Awesome. So I'm a part of two different entities of the Women's Skydiving Network. The first one is called Project 19. And in 2020, we were going to do this world record of getting 100 women to do a vertical oriented head down world record of all women to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which is the women's right to vote. Unfortunately, we got canceled because of COVID, and we have now just announced we postponed it till 2022 because, in order for this to be a world record, we need the borders to be open and we need to finish out some tryouts and things like that. So, we have a lot of events that are helping keep women current in that specific discipline. So that's one thing. So in 2022, it'll be the 102nd anniversary. So we will be doing a 102 way women's vertical world record. And then the other entity is called the Highlight Skydiving Pro Team. And we are 12 women, professional athletes in the sport of skydiving that go around to advocate for women in any industry. So last year in 2020, we were very fortunate to be able to do this because we had to navigate very cautiously around COVID. But we got to go to Nashville in August to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment when it was ratified because Tennessee was the 36th state to ratify the 19th Amendment. So we did a big event there where the entire team was there. We jumped these big flags that commemorated the slogans of the saying in 1920, votes for women, equality can't wait, things like that. So that was extraordinary to be able to be there in the path of history and making our own history. That was very, very empowering. We also got to go to Valley Forge and Seneca Falls. Seneca Falls is the birthplace of the women's rights. So we got to do all these great events to support and highlight the 19th Amendment. And this year, we are working with women in sports. So we are going and highlighting all the things that they are doing. And in a couple of weeks, we'll be in Dallas, Texas, jumping in the Cotton Bowl Stadium.
Oh, awesome. Keep our eye out for that. So, speaking of making history, you have 23 world records, and I'd love to talk about each one of them, but we can't. I'd love to have you pull out one that you just really love that was really meaningful to you and describe it to us.
It's always hard to pick just one because everyone is a different, completely different experience. Just because the camaraderie, sometimes there's different people, I have a different role at everyone. But I think my favorite is when I'll speak on a favorite moment. My favorite moments on World Record Skydives are when I'm sitting in the plane and everybody's quiet and you just feel the vibration of the airplane and you hear the hum of the engines and everything just becomes one and peaceful because everybody on that plane is there for one mission, and it is to do their job so we can get a world record. And that silence as you ride up, you feel that focus and you feel like everyone's got your back. Everyone's helping you with the oxygen, so making sure everybody's good, so no one's getting hypoxic. And then the door opens and you feel this rush of wind come in and you feel your heart elevate, but you stay focused on your breath. You stay in your space. And then you see the light turns green. That calm energy turns into a burst of energy as you run out and jump out the door and feel the wind just envelope your entire body. You look up to see all these other airplanes dumping out all these other jumpers because we're hundreds plus, and you look at your line and you stay laser focused on where you're supposed to go, and you get there as fast as you can. And then as soon as you become on level with everybody else, you take a great big breath. You come in closer and you pick up your grips, which is holding hands with the person that you're connecting. And you create this huge flower shaped pattern. But the skydive doesn't stop once you take your dock. You have to keep flying, looking across the formation, making sure that you're staying level, making sure you're staying calm, making sure you're presenting so the other person docking on you has a good grip so everyone can be successful. So you're focusing on your jump. You're focusing on how you can help your other person around you be successful. And then we have audible altimeters that start to go beep, 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 which triggers us to turn around, and then it becomes a race where we try to get as far away as fast as possible so we can open up our parachutes. And then you hear this blossoming parachute, and the skydive's still not over. You have to make sure you have a good parachute to land. So as soon as you make sure you have a good parachute, you look around because there's 100 plus other parachutes now you have to navigate to get to the ground. But you start to feel your heart again because of that intensity of the free fall. So you maintain your breath, you look where you're going to land, you navigate to land, and once you touch down, you almost feel like you can elevate and float back up to the air because you have just done, whether you were successful or not, a skydive that no one else has ever attempted.
Wow. That was an incredible story. I feel like I've just been up with you and down. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. It's intense. It really is intense. And you've done a beautiful job capturing that. Oh, man. Wow. Intensity. That's a theme here. Yeah. Intensity. And then the benefits of that following through with that, being part of a community, holding when you need to hold, letting go when you need to let it go. And at the end of the day, making a good landing.
Exactly.
Wow. So, gosh, we are going to have to get into the home stretch here. Let me just ask you a couple just general questions. Do you have anything that you're reading now or that you're particularly influenced by that you can share with us?
Wow. I sold my yoga studio last year with the intent of reading more books because I've been so busy. I haven't read books in a very long time. When I was publishing the two books that I had, my thinking was if I have time to read a book, I have time to write my book. So I would never read other books. I would always stay focused on getting that project done. So I feel that I let the floodgates open because I in since last August I finished 16 books and I'm reading 2 now. And like I said, they're all over the map, whether it's a marketing, and like I said, I'm really into Ayurveda. And then I just had some random like business ones, and there's one called Unbroken that I'm reading. I read a lot about women's rights because when we're promoting and advocating for, not advocating for, but when we were commemorating the 19th Amendment, I was surprised on how much of the women's history I didn't even know. So we all educated ourselves, and I love projects like that because you get to dive into certain parts of culture and history that, in my life, it was as much as I lived a worldly life, I was very sheltered as well. So I just love expanding my mind and appreciating where the women's rights movement has come since 100 years ago. But I will say that the most recent book that I am totally into right now, I just finished a couple days ago, is by Dr. John Juilliard. And he is a Western doctor who also studied Ayurveda. So he does a great job mixing Western science with Ayurveda. It's incredible. I mean, I think it's a lot of things that we've already known, but he just puts it in a way that is so tangible on your health. And it's definitely made Ayurveda a more accessible idea and lifestyle for me, for sure.
What is that book called?
Eat wheat.
Eat Wheat.
Hmm. Yeah, he's all about making sure your gut health has been reset and balanced because, they have all these studies where they have proven that humans have eaten wheat for millions of years and dairy. So why is it all of a sudden we have all these allergies and stuff? And he also makes note that there are some certain circumstances where that is a thing, but for the most part, we're treating symptoms. And he's always been a doctor of treating root problems, and that's where he's discovered Ayurveda. And I think he even talks a little bit about the Mediterranean diet because I think he's done a little study in that as well. So he just kind of blends everything together in resetting. And I've kind of been on that journey with my health. And man, I thought just the life of passion and, training and other things, but, just thinking about my health in a completely different way. I have an energy like you wouldn't believe. And I know you have kids too. So that energy is precious when you're dealing with your children.
Yes, when you want any left for yourself or your spouse, yeah, you need to make sure that you're filling your tank. And yeah, it's true. Been a lot these days about the microbiome and your gut health. And it's really neat to hear different approaches to it because I think discovering there's a lot to it, which makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
So, this is a podcast where we celebrate the spirit of taking on challenges and reaching beyond predetermined heights. And we use the metaphor of flight. And in your case, it is literal. But can you leave us with a closing thought about your passion to fly and pursuing that passion?
I think anyone that has a desire, a dream, or a burning sensation within is to know that you are validated for those feelings and to explore them and go for it. Because I think oftentimes I watch too many people get stifled in that fear, whether it's fear of expectation, fear of not making money, fear of what your family is going to think, fear of how you'll be presented and perceived in society. I think fear could engulf us. I know that even though skydiving and flying wasn't really my burning desire, I found that my burning desire is connecting with people. And as soon as I found that thing and my why, everything else literally took off. So this dream or sensation doesn't have to be this extraordinarily big thing. It can be something small. And who knows what that's going to lead to. But once you get on that journey and you go for it, you're going to be so amazed on what unfolds before you.
Wow, that's a great bit of advice. I know that the listeners will want to find out about your books, and we haven't had a chance to talk about the two books that you've written, but can you share where we can purchase them and learn more about the books about your father?
Absolutely. They are both sold on Amazon. The first one in the series is called Sugar Alpha. The other one is Charlie Bravo, which you can also learn more about them and me on my website at melissa-lowe.com.
Awesome. And we'll have all that in our show notes, all those resources. So, Melissa, thank you so much for this conversation. It has been a joy. It's provoked a lot of interesting thoughts. It's just going to be fun to share. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the When Women Fly podcast. My hope is that you leave this conversation with a sense of curiosity and empowerment to hold on to what is important and let go to what weighs you down. Stare fear in the face. If you like this episode of the When Women Fly podcast, be sure to share and subscribe and let us know what you think. We love feedback. Be brave, be bold, and fly. See you next time.